All right, what is up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. I'm your host, JK, and we are kicking off another training and nutrition adjacent episode. It's Tuesday, so we are digging into all things fitness, nutrition related. And today's topic is no different. We are going to talk about something that is called high intensity interval walking. And no, I didn't confuse that high intensity interval training for high intensity interval walking. This is something that has apparently been around for quite some time and just happened to fall into my algorithm recently. So before we get into talking about, I guess we can't really call it who, because HIIW, you've got HIT, HIIT. We're just going to let that one go. Before getting into talking about today's topic, though, I, as always, want to first say thank you for choosing to press play on the Help Me Understand podcast. I certainly know that you have no shortage of podcast content that you can consume for it. So I truly never take it for granted that you chose to press play on Help Me Understand. And one more plug, Help Me Understand is sponsored by Feed Your Habits. Feedyourhabits.com is where you can find t-shirts, sweatshirts, crop tops, overall casual lifestyle apparel for those who truly believe that habits don't just grow on their own, they get fed. So go to feedyourhabits.com, put in my promo code in all caps, JKFYH at checkout. That will get you 10% off of your purchase along with free shipping in the United States. All right, so let's get into today's topic. As I teased at the beginning, we're going to talk about something called high intensity interval walking. I'll share a bit with you about what the research or a specific research study says about it. And most importantly, give you some potential ways that you can practically apply this to your life if you feel like it's something that you can get some impact from, whether it's all of the tips that I share, bits and pieces, or maybe you're doing just fine and this is something that potentially someone else you know could benefit from, then I'll ask you to share this episode with them. So first, I want to talk about just overall where this kind of came from. I was watching a YouTube video, and the person doing the YouTube video was doing a Q&A where they were talking about some different things that were coming across their plate. This was another trainer, and one of the things that was presented to them was whether or not this high intensity interval walking was hype or not. Like, is this overrated, underrated? And they shared a clip. It might have been from TikTok or it might have been from Instagram. I'm not totally sure. But they shared a clip where, as typically the way that these things are marketed when we're talking in the coaching business, we call this top of funnel content. It's very, very basic content meant to grab your attention and bring you in. And the way that it was phrased was, you've been doing walking all wrong. And then it went into talking about how if you are looking to burn fat, you should be doing high intensity interval walking and stop doing just low intensity walking. If you've listened to any of the Tuesday episodes of this podcast before, then you already know where I stand on the whole, well, you've been doing walking wrong because you're not doing it high intensity, so you're not going to burn fat. So I'm not going to waste time on that. If you are, again, new to the Help Me Understand podcast, pick any episode that I've done that is fitness and training related, and you'll be able to accurately predict what I have to say about that. So let's really just focus on what high intensity interval walking is. We're going to deep-ish dive. We're going to deep-ish dive into a study that was done back in 2006, I believe. Yeah, a study that was done in 2006 in Japan, which, for the couple of articles that I was able to find about this method of high intensity interval walking, they both end up referencing this particular study back in 2006. And in one of the articles that I read, they even call this the Japanese interval walking method. So, you know, this is just the way we roll as a society. Everything's got to be a method. It's got to be some sort of like fun alliteration. And I get it. It sells. So let's get into this particular study. So in this particular study, what was done is they started with 246 self-reported healthy adults ages 44 to 78. I took a decent amount of notes on this particular one but I didn't write down the mean age, but I believe that the mean or median age was around 63 years old. So you've got let's call it about 250 adults that were about 63 years old, and they split them into 3 groups. And I do want to mention here, what I'm going to do is share with you what the setup of the study was first, and then talk to you about the outcomes. And then we'll actually go back and look at, okay, what are some potential limitations of the study? And then also, how can you apply this to your life? So setup, you got 250 adults going from 44 to 78. If I remember the breakdown properly, I would say that about 70% of the participants were females, and they split the participants into 3 distinct groups. So first you have your control group. Your control group did no walking at all outside of whatever they would normally be doing throughout the day. Group number 2 was your moderate intensity continuous walking group. So that particular group was told to go for walks, not to change the intensity of their walks that they were going on during this particular study. This particular study went from, I believe it was May to October, so that would be, quick math, about 5 months. So it was a 5-month study. Teaser, there is, to my knowledge, no information about what these folks' activity was prior to this that I found. I know I could probably read maybe a little bit tighter and see, but generally, again, reportedly healthy adults. So group 1, no walking outside of just their normal day-to-day. Group 2, they were asked to walk at a moderate intensity, which I believe the moderate intensity was identified at about 50% of their effort level for walking. I do want to clarify that, because when we're talking about this last group, which is the high intensity training group. So the high intensity group, and again, we're talking high intensity walking. Okay. So high intensity walking, that group operated in the high intensity range of about 70 to 85%. So the moderate intensity, I believe, was at like 50%. But keep in mind, this is percentages based on perceived effort for walking, not sprinting or anything like that. So you've got your 3 groups. You've got taking no additional steps for exercise. You've got taking steps for exercise, but keeping the heart rate moderate, the effort moderate. And then you have the high intensity group that is doing intervals. So the way that this looked is, for the high intensity walking group, there were 4 or more days per week where they were asked to do 5 or more sets of 3 minutes of brisk walking at 70 to 85% walking effort. So 70 to 85% for 3 minutes. And then they would dial it down for 2 to 3 minutes of easy walking, somewhere around 40% effort. So basically, we're talking 3 minutes of 7 to 8 out of 10 energy level for walking, or exertion level for walking, and then 3 minutes of easy breezy, beautiful cover girl walking, like having just nice conversational pace. The way that I describe this in coaching is, if you were to do the talk test, like if you were going for a walk, and you were on a Zoom call or a Teams call for work, and you were called on to speak all of a sudden, if you were at a very moderate to low intensity, they wouldn't be able to tell that you were doing something. Like low intensity, they wouldn't be able to tell that you were doing something. A moderate, they're like, she kind of sounds like she's up to something, but no, maybe she's just, walking up the stairs or something like that. All right. So that's the high intensity group. They did 3 minutes, basically 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off, but it wasn't completely off rest. And they also did weekly coaching check-ins, and they initially did give them 1 month of training to learn what the routine was. So they had 1 month where they would come into this particular facility and their movement was monitored, so that they could train specifically this group how to properly walk at the intensity that they were looking for. Okay, so over 5 months, here are the results, or here's the outcomes that were discovered from the high intensity group. Their overall capacity, so their VO2 peak, increased by about 10%. This was ideally perceived to be an indicator of, improved aerobic capacity, and also their heart and lung function. So that was pretty solid. This is compared to the moderate group. So the moderate group only increased their VO2 peak by about 3%. And this is not shocking. I'm hoping that you would expect that as you have a group that is doing interval work versus another group that's maintaining the same energy level or same exertion level, then the group that's doing the interval levels would ideally be better trained to expand their aerobic capacity. Then the no walking group, their aerobic capacity actually declined by 5%, which is kind of wild. So you've got your interval group who increased their aerobic capacity by about 10%. The group that stayed at the same pace but did it consistently, they increased by 3%. So still some improvement there. However, the no walking group declined by 5%. Then there's 5 outcomes that I'm going to share with you here. The high intensity interval group, their leg strength increased by 13 to 18%. Pretty solid there. The way that they measured that was they did an isometric knee extension. So an isometric means that it was held in that position. So it's like a pause. And a knee extension would be something like if you're seated on a leg extension machine and you extend your leg out and you hold that position. So that increased by 13 to 18% in the interval training group. The moderate group, who again still took additional steps for exercise, kept it at moderate pace, consistently, no wavering with that, they saw no significant improvement in leg strength. So far, moderate group did increase their aerobic capacity just a bit, but no increase in leg strength. So you've got that. One piece from a health standpoint, which was pretty solid, blood pressure dropped significantly in the high intensity group. They had a greater improvement from the high intensity group than both the moderate or the control, so the no movement groups. So overall, in this particular section, it just suggests that getting in some high intensity interval walking can actually aid in blood pressure regulation in high risk populations. So that's something that also potentially you could consider here too, especially if you are someone who has described yourself as, hey, I do want to make sure that I'm getting the health benefits of exercise. It's not just about aesthetics. This is another piece of that puzzle to put together. One other outcome was peak anaerobic power, improving by about 10%. And the way that they assessed this is using a cycling sprint test. So again, improvement by about 10% in anaerobic power at peak, like that's actually pretty significant also. And it does just generally suggest that, again, being able to do these particular types, really any type of exercise, but even walking where you have that interval piece where you are increasing your heart rate for a short amount of time within the range of walking energy or energy exertion, that's still something that can help because it improves your short burst power. So I think that's something pretty significant there also. Something else that was pretty solid is that there were no reported injuries or adverse effects from the participants who passed the qualifying needs to be in the study itself. So a possible takeaway from that could be further validation that walking is for many people. There's always going to be the outliers, but for many people, a very safe and effective way to go for middle-aged to older adults. Because remember, again, the range in this study was 44 to 78, with the median age being, again, if I remember correctly, about 63 years old. So I thought that was pretty significant. So those are going to be your outcomes. And I don't necessarily think any of this stuff is surprising. I would expect that if you are looking at things like aerobic capacity, you're looking at any potential increases in strength, although I definitely would caution against trying to stretch before making the reach. That walking should be included in a significant strength training routine. I would really caution against that. However, doesn't mean that you don't gain any strength at all. Again, we don't know the whole history of the people involved in the study, and I'll get into some of the limitations here in just a minute. But even again, in this study, you're measuring things like strength, you're measuring aerobic capacity, you're measuring blood pressure, you're measuring anaerobic power, and then overall looking at any injuries that happen. significantly positive outcomes from implementing this particular protocol, this Japanese interval walking protocol of 3 minutes around 70 to 85% effort, and then 3 minutes at about 40 to 50% effort. So pretty solid there. All right. So let me share with you what I jotted down as some takeaways that you possibly can have from this particular study, and then I'm going to circle back just to kind of, I don't want to throw a wrench in any of this. I just want to keep it 100 here with you on some things, not just with this study, but you can take the things that I'm going to share with this study that I felt like could be some limitations or some things to kind of think through. You could take this and really apply a bit more of a critical eye to a lot of different studies in the fitness realm. So just generally, a place where I would start is if you are wanting to implement something like this to kind of spice things up when it comes to walking, or if you are just getting into walking and that's going to be for a while your primary form of exercise, and you want to be able to challenge yourself occasionally, then I would start with, if you are taking 4 to 5 walks per week, I would say for 2 of those walks, implement something like a 3-2 style. So 3 minutes of fast walking, 2 minutes of slow walking, 3 minutes of fast walking, 2 minutes of slow walking. So repeating that like 5 times. And then that gets you basically, I can do math, a 25-minute walk in. So doing something like that. So to keep it really simple, I don't necessarily think you need to be like super specific about, well, my heart rate's got to be exactly at this, especially if you're just kind of getting started with it. Think about it like the talk test. Like when you're doing that fast walking, you shouldn't be able to talk in a way that someone can't tell that you are doing some sort of close to vigorous type of exercise at all. So you would need to kind of catch your breath and things like that, but you should not be in like a full out jog or run or anything even close to that. So it should feel like about a 7 to 8 out of 10 effort. Again, 3 minutes fast, 2 minutes slow, where you're just keeping it nice and basic. That's where you can bring your breathing back to a normal, easy conversational pace. Again, I recommend doing that somewhere around 4 to 5 times. If you're walking 4 to 5 times a week, then I would recommend start with a couple times per week and see how that goes. And then what was the other one? Oh, warming up. I do suggest still, if you're going to get into this, especially if you are going to get into this and you are somebody who has primarily been sedentary for the most part. So if you were in this particular study and you more closely identified with the folks who don't do any exercise and you're looking to implement something like this, because remember we had that one group that was sedentary, they didn't do moderate walking, they didn't do interval walking. Outside of the steps that they normally get throughout their day, they didn't do anything different, then I would suggest first just walking at a regular pace for 5 full minutes, and then getting into doing your 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off, 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off, going with something like that. I would recommend that if you are doing something like this, also try to find some sort of a route that doesn't have a whole lot of stops or interruptions or anything like that. If you are able to get access to a track, that can make it really easy for you. This is certainly something that can be done on a treadmill. I think that this is a really solid one though, to be able to do like in your neighborhood, that sort of a thing. For any of the parents who may be listening who have kids in activities that they need to be driven to, especially activities that are outdoors like baseball, softball, soccer, I'm thinking of all the outdoor sports, tennis, whatever it may be, and you've got to get them there minimum 45 minutes before the game starts. So you know who you are out there, then this can be a fantastic alternative to sitting in the car or sitting on the bleachers and just waiting for that particular event to start. Just personal story myself, I know that this was not necessarily the interval walking, but just walking in general, with looking at ways that I could increase my steps. Like some years ago, when my son needed to be at an event an hour ahead of time, I would find that first I was sitting in the car, and then I was thinking to myself, well, I'm sitting here for the next 45 minutes or sitting in the bleachers, just kind of chilling. I could definitely just walk around the field, like the outer rim of the field, or walk around sometimes, especially when he was doing like coach pitch ball. Sometimes those were in a park or something like that. So there was plenty of places to walk around while he was warming up with the team. So just thinking about that for any of my parents out there who have kids that are in athletics or anything outdoors, where you're going to be there early anyway. So you can even put together a little group with a couple of the other parents and you kill some steps while you guys are waiting. So I think that's something that can be really helpful too. All right. So quickly going to go over a couple of things that I jotted down as limitations of the study, and then we will close out this episode. So limitations with this particular study, a few things that I jotted down. With this particular study, there were about, I want to say, I can't remember exactly how many people dropped out of it, but as far as the final results, only 48% of the high intensity walking group ended up meeting the full protocol requirements. So that is something just to think about, that only about half of the people who are in the high intensity walking group met the full protocol requirements. And some of the stuff that had to do with was they didn't necessarily all have access to the same technology to track their information at all times. I mean, you've got human error where people forget things, so they were just guesstimating. So some of that was self-reported. There also was, what was it? There were people that wanted to, for example, there would be a couple that signed up and they tried to place the married couple in separate groups and they didn't want that. So they dropped out too. So say if myself and my wife, we said, yeah, we're going to do this study. And then my wife was selected to be in the high intensity group and I was selected to be in the don't do anything group, like no change. Maybe I'm not down with that. And we signed up because we wanted to do it together. And if they didn't approve us being in the same group, then we dropped out of that particular study. So these are some of the things that sometimes folks don't think about that go on behind the scenes with these. Another potential limitation could be that this was over a 5-month period. Also, this was, I think they said May through October in Japan. So just thinking about that, I used to live in Southeast Asia, so I should know this, but in my defense, I lived in Singapore and Malaysia when I was young, like 8 or 9 years old is when we first moved over there. So I know in Singapore and Malaysia, we did not have cold weather in any way, shape, or form, extremely tropical. And it was literally like you just had monsoon season for the most part. But just taking into account that it was through the months of May through October. Also, what was the last thing? The folks that were in the high intensity walking group, keep in mind that they had access to being run through the protocol prior to the actual testing period or the study period. So if you remember, they received, I think it was a month, if I remember correctly, of coaching, or a week. I can't remember what it was. Let me actually go back and triple check that. Yeah, they had a month. So they had a month before this study started where they were coached by whoever was running this study or whoever the moderators were on exactly what to do. The other groups were not. So that's something to keep in mind also. And then the last thing is folks that signed up for this particular study, clearly they are motivated and they also were healthy to begin with. They're self-reported healthy, no particular health conditions to begin with coming into this. So that's something to keep in mind. And last but certainly not least, no information about any sort of nutrition protocol that was done. There wasn't anything reported about additional training that was done, if they were doing any strength training or anything like that. I believe they were not. This was supposed to be their only form of exercise from what I understand. But again, these aren't folks that are living in the lab for 5 months. So a lot of it's going to go by self-reporting stuff. All right. So here, just to wrap it up, again, just a few takeaways for you. I think that this can be a great example, certainly not the end all be all. However, this can be a great example that walking can and should be included as exercise, like part of your overall exercise routine. I remember sometime last year, I think it was, that Dr. Gabrielle Lyons was on the Ed Milet show, and there was this short clip that went like wacky viral with her saying, we got to stop saying that walking is exercise. And in the context of the conversation, I 99.9, almost close to 100% completely agree. in the context of the conversation that they were having. So if you just listened to only that clip, you probably thought she was crazy and being elitist. But if you actually listen to the full episode, my perspective is that I agreed, because it was more in the context of is walking good enough to just be what you need to do in order to gain muscle, and it is not. So I do actually agree with that. But it's social media. It was clipped up. It went viral. It did what it was supposed to do. And there you go. So this study is something that proves that, or at least potentially for those of us who promote all forms of exercise, that walking can be included as a form of exercise, along with many other things like strength training, high intensity cardio, low intensity cardio, just all sorts of different things can be in there. If you are somebody, again, who's either just getting started, or you feel like you've just kind of hit kind of a wall when it comes to your walking, then I'd say give this a shot. Why not? It's something that can kind of spice things up for you, and also a great way to just spend more time outdoors. And last but certainly not least, I think what's fantastic about it is that you don't need equipment for the most part in order to do it. Again, there's going to be one-offs if you're somebody who potentially has like balance issues and you need like walking sticks or anything like that. Totally get it. Like, it's all good. And also, more often than not, walking is something that for many folks can be pretty accessible. Sometimes you may need to get a bit creative, especially if like time of the day is a concern, safety and different things like that. So be smart when you're out doing this. But if you do give this a shot for a certain period of time, like for a few weeks, and you'd be interested in sharing your results with me on anything that you noticed by going from, instead of moderate intensity walks at most of the time, or low to moderate intensity, and then starting to switch it up with maybe 2 days per week where you did the high intensity walking, where again, it's like 3 minutes on, 2 minutes off. Do that for about 3 weeks and then report back. Let me know what you think. All right. So with that, we are going to bring this episode to a close. So thank you once again for listening to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast. If you'd like to reach out with any sort of feedback, ideas for future topics, anything like that, my contact info is in the show notes. So reach out. And until then, take care, and I'll talk to you next time.